I grew up in Savoy, the big city of Savoy, which is out in the country, so pretty much a little country boy. My family's business was farming. We had the big chicken operation, beef cattle, hogs, pretty much general farming. My part in the family business was pretty much a general flunky. We'd have to round the chickens up. Back then they were outdoors. You had to round them up of a night, and of course taking care of cattle and pigs, feeding them, taking care of them. I did a little work in the summer. We would build chicken houses, worked on a crew doing that in the heat. So I was offered a job here. Of course, I started in the first grade at Farmington School, so I went all the way through. And after I got out of college, I worked a little while teaching at Greenland, and I came back to Farmington when I was offered a job there. I came in 1967. Of course, it was much smaller than it is now. We didn't have as many buildings, but it was consolidated school, of course, with Savoy, where I came from, consolidated with it, as did White Rock and a few others. I was an administrative assistant to the superintendent, and I also taught science. Well, keeping up with the students, attendance and discipline, of course, teaching in the classroom. Also drove a bus at the start, probably for 7 or 8 years. Well, I don't remember much about the town because I never lived here. I came to school and I went home, but it was close-knit, I know that. And we had a big vineyard right across from the original school. Hobo Hickman had a bunch of grapes there, which, of course, we occasionally checked out, but it was a small agricultural area. Well, of course, I started out as a teacher, taught science. Then, a little later, I got into coaching. Of course, when I started, I also ran the summer program, which was coaching all the summer baseball, Pee Wee, Little League, and Babe Ruth all in the same day. Take them on the bus to Mountainburg, try to keep the Pee Wees off the railroad tracks while the older kids were playing ball. And eventually I worked into coaching basketball here. I was the head coach for 2 years. I was also teaching the first year, and the second year I was also principal. And that's a pretty tough combination to try to teach and coach, because you get your practices interrupted with some irate parent, which you have to take time out from your duties. But so after 2 years, I went into teaching and as the principal. Then later I became the assistant superintendent. Also taught a while then before I became full-time, and then later was promoted to superintendent. Well, of course, you spend maybe half a day in the classroom, the other half keeping up with the kids, seeing who's absent, who shouldn't be, and supervising teachers. You have to visit a lot of classes so you can evaluate teachers as well. So it's pretty action-packed. Well, I was at the high school, but then later I went to the middle school when I became assistant superintendent, so I could do both. But there were other principals. There was one at the high school then and one at the elementary then. One of the big ones is just keeping up with kids. And of course, when I was in school, I was known to sometimes not be where I was supposed to, so I usually knew where to look. So sometimes I would be out in the parking lot when they decided to come back, and they, "How did you know?" I said, "Well, I've been there, I've done that." Tracy Elkins particularly was sometimes absent, but kept up with them fairly well. I coached the senior boys, and the first year I had 5 kids who had dropped out of the program the year before. So that was kind of a challenge, but they were good athletes. So we had good teams both years. And I don't know if it was the coach before they didn't like or what, but of course we, as you know, were a football school at the time too. So there was some problem there getting kids out, but the ones I had were good. And they, like I say, they had a good year. They won the district's second year, or the first year. And they were 14-7 the second. Probably the biggest problem was they all played football as well, and Coach Holland, who's a good friend, very successful coach, usually was in the playoffs. And the program carried over after he left so that they still were making playoffs and going deep into them. So I didn't get my players until the other schools had probably played 4 or 5 games at least. But it worked out. When Coach Holland came here, of course, we had decent teams, but they weren't like he built them up. He seemed to have an affinity for working with kids and had a good relationship with them. They listened to him and did what he said, and he just had a knack for coaching. So he built the program to where it became a centerpiece for the community. And Friday nights, everybody came out, and it gave pride in the community, and it's just a great job on his part. I remember one coach who I won't name, at halftime, he was down probably 40-0. Well, we had won the toss to start the game and elected to receive, so he was sitting on the bench at halftime with his head down while his kids went off who knows where, but the officials went by and said, "Well, Coach, it's your option. What do you want to do for the second half?" He said, "I want to go home." And as I say, I won't name him, but we did have predominating teams then. And he's had players. Well, one of his good ones was Danny Absher, who is very successful at Prairie Grove as a coach now. Danny's good people and does a great job for him. But as far as the start of the football program here, when I was a senior, we had our first football team, first high school team, 6-man, which is a totally different game. Every player on the team is eligible as a pass receiver. You have to have a clear pass in the backfield before you can run a play. So our quarterback turned with his back to the center and received the ball through his legs and would pitch it to a halfback, and then he would throw it back to the quarterback so he could run any play he wanted to, but he had that clear pass in there. So it's a wide open game and interesting, but it was a bunch of basketball players who knew nothing about football. I think we won 6 out of 10, something like that the first year. And it evolved from there into 11-man, of course, and Coach Holland put them on the map. Of course, our big rivalry's always been Prairie Grove. It was a friendly one. Got a lot of friends over there. We liked each other, but when we hit the field, we both wanted to win and still do. It would have been about 86 because I was superintendent for 9 years and retired in 95. So it was approximately half the size it is now. Growth was the big problem then, and staying ahead of growth and keeping enough facilities. And the transportation program was a big challenge when I first came in because we'd been in the habit of buying used buses, which don't hold up well. So getting a schedule where we could get new buses in and take care of transportation, stressing academics, which I certainly wanted to do, was important, and have a balanced athletic program as well. One big influence on me was one of the teachers, Hazel Penn. When I was in school, she was a great teacher and a big support. Buddy Elkins was a big supporter and board member. Jim Parks was a great board member, as was Gary Weeks. Had a lot of them that came through. Bob Spears was a good supporter, board member and also supporter of the school, as was his son Randy, who was on the board for a while. Jim Hankins was a good board member. And a lot of parents would help with anything we needed any time. Well, of course, first grade was Marie Brown. A lot of people had Miss Marie Brown. She was a great teacher. But I had others that I liked very much. Kyle Sumter was a good teacher for us back then. Agnes Blue was a great elementary teacher, as was Virginia Wiley and Mary Alexander. There were many of them that were very good. Well, of course, we got into athletics at the first opportunity, which back then was 7th grade, but we had good times. We roamed the country with our BB guns like other kids and rode our bicycles and played baseball and did a lot of swimming down at the old swimming hole in Savoy. down to Mill Ponds. It was much smaller. You didn't have the local businesses like you do now. We had, 2 stores probably. But when I came, there might have been 4. Paul Giles had a store. Roland Edna Davis had one. Granny White, they called her, had a store in town, a little small grocery stores. And Lance Phillips had one directly across from where the old Cardinal drive-in was. They did have a festival for a while on the 4th of July when Bobby Carlisle was the mayor here. They had big fireworks displays and food, and of course they still host a lot of softball tournaments in the summer, things like that. We had food and games and ball games, and then we had a big fireworks display at dark. I know one of the elementary principals at the time was a good friend with Bobby Carlisle, Jay Howard, and he always helped put on the fireworks display, as did the Lions Club, of which he was a member. But he was not always real graceful, and you'd set the fireworks in these big iron pipes and set them off. Well, he set one off, and as he turned to get away from it, he kicked it over, and that caused a bit of a problem for the crowd, where instead of going up, it went toward them. But it was quite a display, and Bobby did a good job with it. Well, we had some great teachers. Roy Hummel, of course, you know Roy. He was very good with the kids. He would do anything in the world for them. He's also real active in the county fair at the time. Jeanette Robbins is a great home ec teacher. Tanya McQuistion was a wonderful teacher. So we had a lot of them that did a good job. Beverly Woodward was a business teacher. And they all did a good job and pulled their weight. Well, one of the outstanding groups we had was about 75 and 76. Wesley Stevens was a really good student. Bill and Gary Cooper, brothers, were both outstanding. And a lot of the girls were as well. Deborah Dorman and Lisa Stevens at the time, who was Lisa Dorman at the time, or not Dorman, Lisa Stevens at the time. And there were a lot of good ones. Billy Carter played basketball for me and was a good student, and he was one of the hardest working kids I've ever seen as far as practice and all. He never took a day off as far as practice goes, always worked hard. Had to watch him though. Sometimes he might think a teammate wasn't hustling. He might want to give him a knuckle sandwich, and I'd have to kind of watch him a little bit. He was really good. And sometimes he would take it into his own hands to discipline them if they didn't. So I'd have to watch him on that until I'd handle that for it. But he's a great player. Worked hard all the time. Tommy Phillips was a really good basketball player for me. Yeah, I kind of got suckered into that. When they went to requiring a CDL license for bus drivers, it was difficult for a lot of the older drivers to get them, and a lot of them just wouldn't do it. So they knew I had a license, which I had for emergencies, had to break down or needed to take some kids home in bad weather. And so my successor, Michael Gray, and the transportation supervisor asked me if I would help out by doing it until they could find somebody. Well, 19 years later, I decided maybe they weren't looking real hard for somebody else. So that's how long I did that. But I enjoyed it as a way of keeping involved with the kids, and I enjoyed dealing with the kids. Yeah, actually what the kids said was, "Why did they name you after a school?" I said, "Because I'm a really good driver," but she kind of got it backwards a little, but she did ask that. One of my first memories is when I started here in the first grade. That was 1948. We had a primary building, which was the old original school, which was attached to the north end of what is now the administration building, because that portion was the upper elementary. Well, you entered through the upper elementary, and we had this indoor ramp leading up to the old original school, which was set up higher. So I remember thinking how long that ramp looked because I hadn't seen anything like it. Savoy had a one-room school, which I didn't attend, but I was familiar with. And when you got up there, it had real high ceilings and old milk glass globes hanging. And we had almost 40 kids in first grade with Marie Brown. So I was kind of out of my element, but she organized a rhythm band. All the kids were in the rhythm band. Well, she selected your cousin, Darrell Tucker, as the conductor, which obviously I thought it should have been me. Not that I was jealous of his position as a conductor, but he got to wear a white shirt and white pants. And I thought that was pretty neat. Most of the kids had 2 drumsticks they beat together in rhythm, but I was a little higher up than that. I got a tambourine at least, but I didn't get to be the director. But I remember seeing the high school basketball team play a game outdoors. They had no gym. Of course, it's in the daytime because they had no lights. It was on a dirt court. Also remember the first year or two I was there when they constructed the old original gym, which we were told to stay away from. And of course, being kids, they had dirt piles and things like that due to the construction, which a good place to play King of the Fort and things like that. Also remember the cafeteria. We had nothing like that at Savoy. The kids down there had, their lunch would usually consist of vegetables brought in. Each kid would bring a big jar of canned vegetables, whatever their mother had, poured in a big pot, which sat on the back of the wood stove, and they'd have soup for lunch that they served themselves. And so to have a cafeteria we would go to over in the next building and have ladies there prepare our lunch and serve it as we went through the line, that was totally different to me. Well, the later grades, we still had that same cafeteria for most of the years. Of course, we went to the old high school building that burned back in the mid-70s. It's where most of my classes were held, and the cafeteria was in the basement of that. So you hoped when you were eating lunch that you didn't have too many people walking upstairs and sifting the cobwebs down on your tray, but it was good. We enjoyed it. I can tell you a real lean time in 1960, which when I graduated, as I told you, we had a football team that year, and we also moved into a new building at the semester of my senior year, which was 6 classrooms, a cafetorium, office, and restrooms. That was the high school building. But one day we showed up in March for school, and the administration met us out there and said, well, get back on the buses, you're going home, school's out. We're broke, we don't have any money to operate the school. So we got out about 6 weeks early, came back in May on our regular date and graduated. So times were hard then. Back then, we got away with it. Now, of course, they'd probably consolidate you if you did that, and Farmington was very nearly consolidated with Fayetteville anyway. But I'd say the reason we didn't was George Ledbetter. George was an old school country superintendent, an old Madison County boy, as he always called it, Booger County. Well, he came in, and George was very frugal. He also was old school in that he didn't really need a school board or principals or anything. He tried to run everything. And he probably was just what they needed at the time because he probably saved the school. I've seen George take his shoes off that he wore to school and give them to a kid that didn't have decent shoes. And he might be out, you'd go say, where's Mr. Ledbetter? And the secretary, he's around here somewhere. And you'd find him down flat of his back in a nice suit with baling wire wiring up tailpipe and muffler on a bus. He loved cigars. He always had one. He'd have that in his mouth, burning holes in his shirt while he was working on the bus. But he saved the school because he was so frugal. He also did some things that would get him in trouble, particularly today. One of his cost-saving measures that he hit upon. He decided the elementary school was using too much toilet paper, so he just took it away. That didn't go over too well. The board ordered him to put it back. He didn't, and eventually that probably was the final straw in him having to leave the school. But he was here several years, and he did save it. He did another thing that you'd want to choke him, but when I was teaching biology, I might have a big test that day. Well, come class time, the girls had come strolling in, but none of the boys. I'd say, where are the senior boys? Oh, Mr. Ledbetter decided to take them golfing today. And of course, some of them made it to the golf course, some of them didn't. A few of them made it back to school, but not too many. But he loved golf. He also was a fisherman. He'd bring crappie in, and while the ladies were trying to serve lunch, he'd take over the deep fryers and he would fry fish and take it around and pass it around to kids. And of course, the ladies didn't like that because he kind of got in their way, but that was just the way he was. He'd do anything in the world for you, though. Of course, utilities is one place you can save a little money, so they just watch the lights, the heat level, and things like that. Something broke, they tried to fix it themselves, had a maintenance man who worked hard at that. But back then, it was close-knit, and they might argue among themselves, but don't jump on them, because then they'd all turn around and jump on you. But they were really close-knit. A lot of people related to others in the community that people didn't realize, and it was close-knit and friendly.